Well, I'm amazed. I said the election campaign was off and running, although it's 29th of November next year, the election. That's locked in, they're fixed terms. But during the very first ad break on this program, and we've got Daniel Andrews' transport policy, the opposition all over the papers and being debated, and the government has started advertising. This is the ad that went to air a minute ago.
Victoria is growing fast. That's why the Victorian Government is improving public transport and roads to build a better transport network for all Victorians.
Okay, I won't use it all. It's a long ad. I assume it's expensive. The Premier, Dr. Denis Napthine, good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
Have you started the election advertising campaign?
We always try to keep all Victorians informed of what we're doing to improve our transport system across the state, both public transport and our road network, so that people can get around our city and around our state in a more efficient manner and make sure our businesses...
Who's paying for that, the government or the Liberal Party?
These are government advertisements that are funded to inform people and direct them to the website so that they can better understand how we're putting on more trains, more trams, more buses, how we're delivering better roads.
Is it a coincidence that advertising campaign starts at the same time the opposition launches their policy in this area?
The campaign's been going for about 10 days now, so it's no coincidence at all. We weren't aware until we read in the paper this morning of Daniel Andrews' launch of his...
Okay, now fair enough. Okay, now one of his plans is to sell the Port of Melbourne. That would look like a good idea. Will you do it?
Well, what we're seeing here is a recipe for gridlock, congestion and chaos.
What, there's no good ideas in
Well, there's no new trams, no new trains, no new buses. It condemns us to decades of gridlock, decades of frustration. The government, when they were in government, had Rod Eddington do a plan for Melbourne and Victoria's transport, and he recommended the East-West Link. Now, that's been completely dumped by the Labor Party, and now we see little or nothing in terms of rail capacity. So we've got a Labor Party that's turned its back on its own plan.
Isn't it a good idea that they look at extra lanes on the West Gate? Isn't it a good idea to widening the Tullamarine to 6 lanes? Well, isn't it a good idea to fix 50 dodgy level crossings?
Well, let's look at the West Gate. What they're proposing in the West is an absolute slap in the face for the people in the western suburbs and Werribee and Geelong, because the best solution, the real solution, is the Western Link of the East-West Link. That's what the real solution is. That's what Eddington recommended. That's what John Brumby and his government endorsed. And now we're seeing Daniel Andrews walking away from the western suburbs, giving them a second-rate, cheap con job instead of giving them a real solution.
So wouldn't extra lanes help on the West Gate?
No, what we need to do is get traffic off the West Gate.
Right. What about
and we do that through the Western Link of the East-West Link. Well, that's what the real plan is about. Build the Western Link of the East-West Link to get traffic off the Westgate Freeway and off the Westgate Bridge to create that second crossing. That's what it's all about in the West.
What about widening Tullamarine?
Well, widening Tullamarine, there's certainly some advantages in that. And what we're doing with East-West Link Stage 1 tunnel, we're providing additional capacity on the initial stage of the Tullamarine, and there's other further work to be done on possibilities of expanding the Tullamarine Freeway.
So you'll look at widening Tullamarine as well?
I think there's some options there as well.
What about the 50 worst level crossings? You're doing what, 8?
Well, we've got 5 underway at the moment, and we've got another 7 in planning, and that's a very, very good program compared to 11 years under Labor, where little or nothing was done with respect to level crossings.
Oh yeah, but we're
getting on with the job.
50 here over what, 8 years?
But Neil, I don't think you can do 50 in 8 years. That would cause enormous chaos on our road and rail. What you've got to do is when you do a level crossing, it causes enormous disruption to both road and rail. So you've got to do them strategically, you've got to do them appropriately, so that you can minimise the disruption to the road and rail system as you do them. Okay. That's what we've done. We're doing 5 in the first 3 years in office. We've got another 7 in planning. That is about the maximum you can do without causing chaos and congestion on our road and rail system.
That makes sense. Now, what about selling the Port of Melbourne? When you look at it?
Well, what we need to understand is the Port of Melbourne is really important for jobs and the economy of our state.
Yep.
Important for our exporters, important for jobs. And you need to have an integrated port strategy. We know and even Labor admitted in Parliament the other day that the Port of Melbourne by the mid-2020s, late 2020s, will be at capacity. So we need a new port. Our solution, and we're working on it already, is a new port at Hastings, a new deep water port. So you need to have an integrated port strategy that involves the Port of Melbourne continuing for some time in the future and a transition to a new deep water port at Hastings. And that's got to be an integrated strategy rather than a short-term money grab.
So will you look at selling it or not?
Well,
as part of the integrated strategy?
We've got to have an integrated strategy. We're sick of Labor.
What's an integrated strategy?
Well, what we've got to do is make sure we can have a proper transition from one port to the other. So rather than just selling one without having a plan about how you're going to fund the next port, you need to link the two together and work together, have an integrated strategy.
So will you
and
sell
that's
either
what
of them?
we're doing.
Will you sell either of them?
Well, we will have an integrated strategy to make sure that Victoria and Melbourne, which is the freight and logistics capital of Australia, 37% of all containers going through anywhere in Australia go through the Port of Melbourne. It is one of our great drivers of jobs in the economy of this state.
But will your
we don't want to jeopardise that.
Will your integrated strategy include the sale either the Port of Melbourne or the Port of Hastings?
Well, we will be examining those issues to make sure we have a proper integrated strategy for our port management in the best interests of Melbourne and Victoria.
So you don't yet know whether you'll sell one of them?
Well, we will have a proper strategy, and we already have in place a strategy to develop the Port of Hastings. Labor have no strategy in terms of port capacity and the port's future and the jobs that are associated with it.
Well, Labor has also said they'll set up in legislation that all traffic camera and speeding fines have to go into a Better Roads Victoria Trust account. Will you do that?
Well, what we've got here is a promise of less funding for roads in regional and rural Victoria under their plan than is currently available under the current government. And it's, well, because they're offering I think $1 billion for arterial roads over the next 8 years, which is less than is currently funded in our budget and has been funded in recent years.
In fairness,
so they're actually taking money away from regional roads, they're taking money away from arterial roads, and they're putting less into roads, and they're putting nothing into new trams, trains or buses.
Will you, though, look at this idea that all traffic camera and speeding fines go into the Better Roads Victoria Trust account by way of legislation?
Well, we spend more than that on roads now.
No, but this goes in as well. But that ends the revenue-raising argument, doesn't it? We're putting the money into roads and transport.
Whether you get the money out of pot A or pot B, what is really the issue for roads is how much you spend. And we as a coalition government are spending more money on roads now than Labor is promising to spend in the future. More money on roads now. We're also giving $160 million over 4 years directly to local councils for local roads and bridges. So there's more money on roads under a coalition, more money for country roads, more money for arterial roads, more money for local councils for local roads than under the Labor plan.
So how much do you put into roads all up?
All up, we $160 million over 4 years into local roads, and there is hundreds of millions of dollars across our roads.
You're criticising them for saying a minimum of $1 billion over 8 years. How much will you put in over 8 years?
Well, it'd be significantly more than $1 billion.
How much? How much in this year?
I will get those figures and get back to you, but it's significantly more than $1 billion over 8 years.
Can you tell me how much in the next year?
In the next year, not off the top of my head. I'd have to look up the budget figures.
Okay, what is the worst road in Victoria?
The worst road in Victoria? I would probably say in my area, the Hayward-Woolthorpe Road is one of the worst in Victoria.
What about the worst for traffic congestion?
The worst for traffic congestion, RACV's identified that, and they say the two worst traffic congestions are the Eastern Freeway, Hoddle Street intersection and Balti Bridge, and that's why we're getting on with the job of building East-West Link Stage 1.
Thank you very much for your time. The Premier, Dr. Denis Napthine.